In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the United States welcomed millions of immigrants from across the globe. They arrived with hopeful eyes and heavy hearts, carrying dreams of opportunity, freedom, and a new life in a land they viewed with almost romantic idealism. But the road to becoming American was not an easy one. This is the story of how assimilation, Americanization, and nativism all came crashing together and how that mix helped shape the country we know today. Let's get started. For many immigrants, especially those newly arrived, the dream of being American was deeply personal. They wanted to belong, but belonging came with a cost. As they navigated daily life, the pressure to assimilate and Americanize loomed large. This pressure was even stronger for the second generation, the children of immigrants, who sought often to distance themselves from the tradition of their parents. Young women, in particular, began to resist the old ways. Some pushed back against arranged marriages, while others fought for the right to work outside the home, challenging their parents' expectations. The broader society was not neutral either. Old stock Americans, those whose families had been in the United States for generations, actively encouraged or demanded assimilation. Public schools taught only in English. Employers often insisted that their workers do the same. Even church leaders, frequently native born or more assimilated immigrants, preached the virtues of adopting American ways. The message was clear: to thrive in America, you had to stop being who you were. But for many native born Americans, assimilation wasn't enough. They didn't want immigrants just to become American, they didn't want them to be here at all. This fear and resentment gave rise to nativism, a belief that immigrants were a danger to the American way of life. As one laborer bitterly complained, immigrants work for almost nothing. Others, like a professor at Stanford University, saw them as culturally inferior. He called them illiterate, docile, lacking in self reliance and initiative. Much of this hostility was rooted in religious prejudice, especially against Catholics and Jews. The most successful of these was the American Protective Association, or APA. Formed in 1887, the group's founder warned of Catholic conspiracies, and the organization exploded in size during the economic depression of 1893, reaching 500,000 members. The APA called for immigration restrictions, stricter naturalization laws, and the teaching of, and I quote, American language and values in schools. And they weren't alone. In 1885, Reverend Josiah Strong published a book titled Our Country, condemning immigrant filled cities as a threat to American morality and order. The message of the nativists was consistent: these newcomers didn't belong. This wave of nativism soon reached the halls of power. In 1891, Representative Henry Cabot Lodge of Massachusetts took up the cause, pushing for laws to exclude illiterate immigrants. Over the next 2 decades, Congress passed four such bills, but they were vetoed each time by President Grover Cleveland in 1897, William Howard Taft in 1913, and Woodrow Wilson in 1915. It wasn't until 1917 that Congress finally overrode Wilson's veto, imposing a literacy test on incoming immigrants. But long before that, one group had already faced outright exclusion: the Chinese. By 1880, about 75,000 Chinese immigrants lived in California, making up one ninth of the state's population. Many white workers resented them for working for low wages and for, in the words of one editor, having disgusting habits. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act over President Chester A. Arthur's veto, banning nearly all Chinese immigration for 10 years. Only a select few, like teachers, merchants, and students, were allowed in, and only if they had Chinese American parents. This law wasn't a one time event either. It was renewed, extended indefinitely in 1902, and would remain in place until 1943. As some Americans sought to lock out immigrants, others justified inequality with a dangerous idea: social Darwinism. According to this theory, human society mirrored the natural world. Only the strongest survived. If a man owned a factory, he was seen as more fit than the workers inside it. If people lived in poverty, it was because they were weak. William Graham Sumner, a leading voice of social Darwinism, argued that government should take a hands off or laissez faire approach. Any attempt to help the poor, like regulating business, taxing the wealthy, or improving housing, was viewed as interfering with the natural order. In this worldview, helping the unfit was a mistake. But not everyone believed the poor deserved their fate. Amidst the poverty and prejudice, a new movement emerged to help immigrants navigate American life. It was called the Settlement House Movement. By 1900, there were around 100 settlement houses across the country. The most famous was Hull House, opened in 1889 in Chicago by Jane Addams and Ellen Starr. Staffed by educated middle class idealists, many of them women, these homes offered immigrants a place to learn English, receive childcare, and adapt to American customs without abandoning their identity. At Hull House, children joined clubs and kindergartens, mothers found care for their babies, and the community came together for health clinics, music and art lessons, and even banking services. But Adams and her team didn't stop there. They became fierce advocates for housing laws, public playgrounds, child labor regulations, and workers' compensation. In a time when many turned their backs, Jane Addams and the settlement house pioneers reached out and helped immigrants find not just survival, but dignity. The story of American immigration is not just a story of borders and laws. It's a story of identity, of power, and of what it means to belong. In the push and pull between assimilation and resistance, in the conflict between exclusion and empathy, the character of the nation began to take shape. And frankly, it's a conversation we're still having today. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.